true to that. Neither one has separated themselves in any sort of way, and so this is the easy way to decide it. Deshaun started the practices off as the one out of the gate, and he'll just continue with the preseason games, and then we...
Shedeur Sanders threw an absolute perfect spiral. A tight, laser-guided, deep ball dime. Right into the hands of Jeudy. And Jeudy dropped it. Again. Shedeur Sanders, the most talked-about young quarterback in the entire NFL right now. Doing everything right. Reading the defense. Stepping up in the pocket. Delivering a throw that any receiver at any level of football should catch in his sleep. And the man on the other end of that pass just let it fall straight through his hands like the ball was made of smoke. Like his fingers were made of glass. Like catching a football was something he had never in his entire professional career been asked to do before. This is NFL gossip, and today we are exposing exactly what this league does not want you to see. Because what is happening to Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland right now is not just frustrating. It is not just disappointing. It is a deeply embarrassing, structurally broken, organizationally cowardly situation that is actively sabotaging the development of the most important young quarterback this franchise has seen in a generation. And the people responsible for fixing it are doing absolutely nothing. Nothing. While Shedeur Sanders stands on that practice field, dropping back, reading coverages, delivering perfect passes, there is a man running routes on the other side of the ball who has decided, consciously or unconsciously, it almost does not matter which, that his job is optional. That catching the football is a suggestion. That being a professional wide receiver in the National Football League is something he can just choose to show up for whenever the mood strikes him. Jeudy. The same Jeudy who had the absolute nerve, the unmitigated, breathtaking, jaw-dropping nerve, to get on TikTok and publicly talk about which quarterback he preferred to play with. The same Jeudy who is supposed to be a #1 wide receiver on this roster. The same Jeudy who by every observable measure at practice this summer cannot catch a cold. Cannot catch a cold. That is not a metaphor I am reaching for. That is the most accurate, precise, clinically correct description of what is happening on that Browns practice field every single day. And here is the part that is going to make your blood absolutely boil. This is not new. This is not a one-day aberration. This is not a case of a receiver having a bad morning and shaking it off by the afternoon. This is a pattern. A chronic, persistent, maddening, season-ruining pattern that has followed Jeudy from one city to the next, from one quarterback to the next, from one coaching staff to the next, and somehow, the Cleveland Browns front office looked at that pattern and decided that this was the man they wanted on the field when Shedeur Sanders was trying to prove himself to the entire league. Think about what is really going on here. Shedeur Sanders came into this situation already fighting against a current. He was thrown into the fire last season, limited games, limited support, a roster that was not built around his success, and he competed. He showed up, he did the work. And now, in this critical, franchise-defining training camp, with every single rep mattering, with every single throw being evaluated, with the entire football world watching to see whether this kid is the real deal, the Browns have handed him a wide receiver who is actively, visibly, embarrassingly dropping passes that a high school kid would catch on a Friday night under the lights in Ohio. And it does not stop there, because while all of this is happening on the practice field, the front office and the coaching staff are simultaneously running the most confusing, the most tone-deaf, the most organizationally incoherent quarterback competition structure that anyone in professional football has seen in years. Deshaun Watson, a quarterback who has not played meaningful football in almost 2 years, is getting the first preseason start against the Bears, at home, away from the Cleveland crowd, because apparently the Browns are so worried about protecting Deshaun Watson's feelings that they do not want him to face a mixed reaction from his own fan base in his first game back. Let that sink in. Let that sink all the way to the bottom. They are managing the optics of Deshaun Watson's emotional comfort, while Shedeur Sanders is out there on the practice field getting his throws dropped by a receiver who would rather be on social media than catching footballs. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly who benefits from this arrangement. And I promise you, it is not Shedeur Sanders. But here is where it gets so much worse. Because the drops, the TikTok drama, the mismanaged quarterback competition, none of that exists in isolation. All of it is connected. All of it is part of the same deeply dysfunctional organizational culture that has turned the Cleveland Browns into the most chaotic, the most self-sabotaging, the most reliably disappointing franchise in the modern NFL. And the people at the top, the coaches, the front office, the decision-makers, are either too blind to see it or too gutless to change it. Let me lay out the evidence for you, because I want to make sure every single person watching this understands exactly what happened and exactly why it matters. Shedeur Sanders drops back. He reads the defense. He steps up. He throws a deep ball spiral. A perfect, tight, accurate, catchable deep ball. Right into Judy's hands. Right in the breadbasket, as they say. Right where any receiver, at any level, should be able to pull it in and run. And Judy drops it. Not bobbles it. Not gets his hands on it and loses it in traffic. Drops it. Clean. Standing still. No contact. No pressure. No excuse. Just drops the ball that a #1 wide receiver in the National Football League is paid to catch. Now, I want you to sit with that for a second. Because this is not a one-rep story. This is not a single bad day. The reports coming out of Brown's training camp this summer have been consistent, and they have been damning. Judy is dropping passes, over and over and over, the same way he dropped passes last season. The same way he has dropped passes throughout his career. The same chronic, inexplicable, infuriating inability to do the one thing, the single, fundamental, baseline thing, that his job requires of him. Catch the football. And here is the word I want you to focus on right now. The word is again. Not occasionally, not sometimes, again. That word is doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting in this story, and I do not think enough people are paying attention to what it is quietly admitting. Again means this is not a surprise. Again means the people who put Judy on this roster knew. They knew that this was a possibility. A strong possibility. A near certainty, based on everything this receiver has shown throughout his professional career. And they put him out there anyway. They put him out there, handed him a spot on the depth chart, and then watched him drop passes in front of the young quarterback they are supposedly trying to develop. That is not bad luck. That is a choice. A laughable, tone-deaf, organizationally self-sabotaging choice. And it doesn't stop there, because the conversation around Judy's drops is being drowned out by the even louder, even more chaotic noise around the quarterback competition itself. And that noise is revealing something deeply troubling about how the Cleveland Browns front office actually thinks about Shedeur Sanders and his future with this team. Don't take my word for it. These are heavy hitters. Listen to what they said.
Weak. Well, there's some people that would argue then that Shedeur would get way less of a chance if that's the outcome, because the joint practices, and the only joint practice they have is that Thursday against the Bills. If that's all Shedeur gets, or that's all that we're talking about, and Deshaun gets that instead of Shedeur, that's a real advantage to Deshaun.
They said it out loud, on the record. Neither one has separated themselves in any sort of way. That is the official framing from the people covering this situation. And I want you to hear what that framing is actually doing. Because when you say neither quarterback has separated himself, what you are really saying is that the evaluation process has been so muddied, so structurally compromised, so contaminated by outside factors, like, say, a starting wide receiver who cannot catch the ball, that it is impossible to make a clean, honest, fair assessment of either player. And in a competition where the deck is already stacked in favor of the veteran, that muddiness does not hurt Deshaun Watson. It hurts Shedeur Sanders. Every single time. Think about what is really going on here. Todd Monken came into this training camp saying he wanted the quarterback competition decided before the team went on summer vacation. He wanted a starter in place. He wanted clarity. And what happened? Neither player separated himself. The competition remained a, quote, dead heat. And so now we are deep into the preseason, and the Browns are still pretending this is an open competition, while simultaneously handing the first preseason start, the first real live game evaluation opportunity, to Deshaun Watson, the quarterback who has not played in nearly 2 years, the quarterback whose contract situation is one of the most catastrophically mismanaged financial disasters in the history of the modern salary cap era. The quarterback whose presence on this roster is itself an organizational anchor dragging the entire franchise toward the bottom of the AFC North. And here is where the enabler complicity becomes impossible to ignore. The national media, the television pundits, the beat reporters, the analysts who cover this team every single day, have been remarkably, conspicuously, almost suspiciously gentle about the way they are discussing this situation. They are talking about preseason scheduling logistics. They are talking about joint practice rep distributions. They are talking about 2-minute drill opportunities and half-game evaluations. They are wrapping this entire story in the language of process and procedure, as if what is happening in Cleveland is a normal, rational, well-managed quarterback competition, rather than a chaotic, self-serving, organizationally incoherent mess that is burning through Shedeur Sanders' development window one dropped pass at a time. Which brings me to the thing nobody in the media will say out loud. The thing that every honest football observer can see, but that the polite, careful, access-protecting world of NFL coverage refuses to acknowledge directly. The tie, in this quarterback competition, goes to Deshaun Watson. That is not my opinion. That is what the insiders covering this team are saying on the record. And if you understand what that means, if you really let the full weight of that land, then you understand that this was never a truly open competition. It was never a level playing field. It was never a situation where the best quarterback would simply win the job on merit. It was always, from the very beginning, a situation where Shedeur Sanders had to be so dramatically, so undeniably, so overwhelmingly better than Deshaun Watson, that the organization could not in good conscience ignore it. And even then, there was never any guarantee that merit would be the deciding factor. And here is the part that is going to make your blood absolutely boil. Shedeur Sanders is trying to make that case. He is doing everything right. He is dropping back, reading the defense, throwing perfect spirals, delivering accurate deep balls with timing and touch, and the kind of natural quarterbacking instincts that you simply cannot coach into a player who does not already have them. He is doing his job. He is doing it well. He is doing it over and over, every single day at practice. And the man running routes on the other end of those throws, the man who is supposed to be catching those passes and giving the coaching staff and the front office a clear, unambiguous picture of what Shedeur Sanders can do at the professional level. That man is dropping the ball. Dropping it. Over and over and over again. Let me say that back to you in the harshest possible terms so you do not miss it. Jeudy is not just failing to help Shedeur Sanders. Jeudy is actively, measurably, demonstrably hurting Shedeur Sanders' chances of winning this quarterback competition. Every dropped pass is a data point that the coaching staff has to factor into their evaluation. Every incompletion, regardless of whether it was the quarterback's fault or the receiver's fault, goes into the ledger. And in a dead-heat competition where the tie goes to the veteran, every single incompletion matters. Every single one. Drop after drop after drop. And the picture of Shedeur Sanders that the Browns front office is building is being painted with someone else's incompetence. Now let's talk about the structure of this competition. Because the structure itself is one of the most quietly damaging things happening to Shedeur Sanders right now. And I want to be precise about this, because the details matter enormously. Don't take my word for it. These are heavy hitters. Listen.
I would probably say the tie goes to the veteran Deshaun Watson. I've said this, and I know that people have come after me for saying it, but organizationally,
let me say that back to you in the harshest possible terms, so you do not miss it. There are people, serious football people who watch film and cover this team for a living, who are openly arguing that the way the joint practice reps are being distributed could represent a real, structural, built-in advantage for Deshaun Watson in this competition. And the only joint practice available, the only one, is against the Buffalo Bills. One practice, against one of the best defenses in the entire American Football Conference. And the question of who gets the majority of those reps, who faces the first-team defense, who gets the 2-minute drill experience against a legitimate NFL secondary, that question has enormous consequences for how this competition ultimately gets decided. Sit with that for a second. One joint practice. And the way those reps get divided could effectively determine the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns for the 2025 NFL season. That is not a small thing. That is not a procedural footnote. That is a franchise-altering decision being made in the shadows of a training camp practice schedule, while the national media is busy debating whether the preseason game order gives one quarterback a meaningful advantage over the other. And here is what makes the whole thing even more maddening. Todd Monken, the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, went into this training camp saying he wanted the competition decided before summer vacation. He wanted clarity. He wanted a starter named. And what did he get? A dead heat. Weeks of practice, 2 quarterbacks, and no separation. And now he is trying to use 2 preseason games and 1 joint practice to make a decision that he could not make through an entire spring and the bulk of training camp. And he is making that decision while one of his starting wide receivers is dropping passes at practice, while the evaluation process is being actively contaminated by a receiver who cannot catch the football. And if you can believe it, this is exactly where the whole thing gets even more damning. Because here is the question that nobody in the mainstream NFL media is asking loudly enough. What does it say about the organizational structure of the Cleveland Browns that they are in this position at all? What does it say about the front office's planning, their roster construction, their decision-making process, that they entered this training camp without a clear starting quarterback, with a receiver who has a documented history of drops starting alongside him, and with a competition structure that, by the admission of the people covering it, was always likely to end with the tie going to the veteran. Think about what is really going on here. The Cleveland Browns spent an extraordinary, unprecedented, historically absurd amount of guaranteed money on Deshaun Watson. A contract that is still weighing on this franchise's salary cap like a concrete block tied around its ankle. And now they are trying to navigate a quarterback competition that, if it goes the wrong way, could see them start the 2025 season with Deshaun Watson under center. A quarterback who has not played meaningful football in nearly 2 years, whose body of work before the injury was deeply inconsistent, and whose presence on the roster has been a source of organizational chaos, public controversy, and fan alienation since the day he arrived in Cleveland. And while all of that is happening, while the front office is trying to manage the optics of the Watson situation, trying to protect the investment, trying to justify the unjustifiable, Shedeur Sanders is out there on the practice field, doing everything right and getting his throws dropped by a wide receiver who had the audacity to go on TikTok and publicly comment on the quarterback competition. Let me say that again. Jeudy, a receiver who cannot reliably catch the football at practice, went on social media to talk about which quarterback he preferred. He made himself a public figure in this story. He inserted himself into the narrative, and then he went out to practice and dropped passes. That is not a minor footnote. That is a character study. That is a window into the kind of organizational culture that exists in Cleveland right now. A culture where a receiver who is performing at a fourth-string level feels comfortable enough, emboldened enough, chunked enough to go on TikTok and weigh in on the quarterback competition while simultaneously failing to do his own job. And that culture does not exist in a vacuum. That culture is created and maintained by the people at the top, by the coaches who tolerate it, by the front office that enables it, by the organizational structure that has allowed this kind of chaos to become the baseline expectation for a franchise that is supposed to be building towards something. Don't take my word for it. These are heavy hitters, and what you are about to hear is one of the most revealing, most damning, most quietly explosive things said about this situation by a credible insider voice. Listen.
I feel like this thing's kind of been a dead heat all the way through, going all the way back to the spring.
They said it, out loud, on the record. The tie goes to the veteran. The tie goes to Deshaun Watson. And I want you to really hear what that is admitting, because it is admitting something enormous. It is admitting that this competition was never purely about who is the better quarterback right now. It is admitting that organizational inertia, the weight of the contract, the weight of the investment, the weight of the institutional reluctance to admit a catastrophic mistake, is a factor in who starts for the Cleveland Browns. It is admitting that Shedeur Sanders has to clear a higher bar than Deshaun Watson just to earn the right to play football for the team that drafted him. And that is not me being dramatic. That is not some clickbait hot take. That is simply what the tape shows. That is what the people covering this team are saying on the record. The tie goes to the veteran. The tie goes to Watson. And the implication of that, the full, ugly, uncomfortable implication, is that Shedeur Sanders could outperform Deshaun Watson in every measurable way throughout this entire preseason. And if the margin is close enough to be called a dead heat, he still might not get the job. Now let's talk about what the enablers are doing. Because the coaching staff and the front office are not the only ones responsible for this situation. The national media, the television analysts, the major sports networks, the reporters who have access to this organization and who shape the public narrative around it, have been doing something very specific and very damaging in the way they are covering this story. They are normalizing it. They are taking the most dysfunctional, the most structurally absurd, the most organizationally incoherent quarterback competition in recent NFL memory and presenting it as a reasonable, well-managed process. They are talking about preseason scheduling as if it is a sophisticated evaluation tool. They are talking about joint practices as if they are a meaningful substitute for actual game experience. They are giving the Cleveland Browns front office a level of credibility and benefit of the doubt that this organization has done absolutely nothing to earn. And here is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Because this is not the first time the Cleveland Browns have done something like this. This is not the first time this organization has taken a young quarterback, a quarterback with genuine talent, genuine promise, genuine upside, and put him in a situation designed to obscure his strengths and amplify his weaknesses. This is a franchise with a documented decades-long history of mismanaging quarterback talent. A franchise that has burned through more starting quarterbacks in the last 20 years than most teams cycle through in a generation. And now they have Shedeur Sanders, a young quarterback who came into this situation already fighting against the current, already dealing with the weight of his father's legacy and the national media's obsession with that legacy. And they are handing him a receiver who drops passes and a competition structure that defaults to the veteran if the margin is close. Let me be completely clear with you about what this means in practical terms. Every single dropped pass by Jeudy is a rep that Shedeur Sanders cannot get back. Every incompletion that goes into the evaluation ledger, regardless of fault, is a data point that could be used to justify keeping Deshaun Watson on the field. Every joint practice rep that goes to Watson instead of Sanders is a missed opportunity for the young quarterback to demonstrate his ability against live NFL competition. And every day that this situation continues without the coaching staff and the front office stepping in and demanding accountability from Jeudy, demanding that a supposed number one wide receiver show up and do his job, is a day that the Cleveland Browns are choosing organizational dysfunction over Shedeur Sanders' development. And here is the part that is going to make your blood absolutely boil all over again. Because I want to go back to something that was said in the conversation around this competition. Something that sounds reasonable on the surface but that reveals, under even the lightest scrutiny, a deeply troubling organizational philosophy. The argument being made by some insiders is that starting Deshaun Watson first actually benefits Shedeur Sanders in the long run. The argument goes like this. If Watson starts and it does not go well, then Sanders gets the rest of the season. He gets a full extended evaluation period. He gets more games than the 7 he had last year, where he was thrown into the fire and not set up for success. I want you to sit with that for a second, because that argument, that framing, is essentially saying that the Cleveland Browns' plan for developing Shedeur Sanders involves using Deshaun Watson as a human sacrificial starter. It is saying that the best-case scenario for Shedeur Sanders is that the quarterback ahead of him on the depth chart fails publicly and dramatically enough that the organization has no choice but to turn to him. That is not a development plan. That is not a quarterback competition. That is a passive, cowardly, organizationally gutless approach to one of the most important decisions this franchise has made in years. And the person paying the price for that approach, the person whose career timeline, whose development window, whose first impression on the entire NFL is being shaped by that approach, is Shedeur Sanders. And if you can believe it, this is exactly where the whole thing gets even more damning. Because we have not even fully addressed the TikTok situation. Judy, a wide receiver who is, by the observable evidence of training camp, performing at a level that should have him fighting for his roster spot, not commenting on quarterback competitions, went on social media and publicly weighed in on which quarterback he preferred. Think about the audacity of that. Think about the organizational culture that produces that kind of behavior. A receiver who is dropping passes at practice, who is failing at the most basic requirements of his position, who is actively hurting the evaluation process for the young quarterback the team drafted. And that receiver feels comfortable enough, feels unchecked enough, feels secure enough in his position to go on TikTok and make himself part of the story. That does not happen in a well-run organization. That does not happen in a locker room with strong, clear, accountable leadership. That happens in a place where the standards have eroded, where the accountability structures have collapsed, where the culture of excellence has been replaced by a culture of entitlement and chaos. And that culture, that deeply dysfunctional, self-sabotaging organizational culture, is the environment that Shedeur Sanders is trying to develop in. That is the environment that is supposed to be incubating the next great Cleveland Browns quarterback. Which brings me to the verdict, and I am going to be direct about this, because the situation demands directness.
True to that. Neither one has separated themselves in any sort of way, and so this is the easy way to decide it. Deshaun started the practices off as the one out of the gate, and he'll just continue with the preseason games, and then
They said it, out loud, on the record. It has been a dead heat all the way through. And I want you to hear what that means coming from an insider who has been watching this competition up close. A dead heat. Not Shedeur Sanders pulling away. Not Shedeur Sanders making the case so clearly and so convincingly that the organization cannot ignore it. A dead heat, in a competition where the tie goes to the veteran. In a competition where the veteran is Deshaun Watson. In a competition where Shedeur Sanders is dropping back and throwing perfect spirals that are being dropped by his own receiver. A dead heat. That is where this stands. And here is my verdict. Here is what I believe, based on everything that has been reported, everything that has been observed, everything that the insiders covering this team are saying on and off the record. The Cleveland Browns front office is not running a quarterback competition. They are running a protection operation. They are protecting the Deshaun Watson investment. They are protecting the organization from having to publicly admit that the most financially catastrophic quarterback contract in NFL history was a mistake. They are protecting the coaching staff from having to make a difficult, uncomfortable, organizationally consequential decision. And the cost of all that protection, the hidden cost, the cost that does not show up in the press releases or the training camp reports, is being paid by Shedeur Sanders, one dropped pass at a time. Now let me stake some predictions. Because this situation is moving fast, and the decisions being made in the next few weeks are going to have consequences that last for years. Prediction 1. If Deshaun Watson starts the season opener and the Browns struggle, and based on everything we know about Watson's current physical condition and his 2-year absence from meaningful game action, struggling is the most likely outcome. The pressure to start Shedeur Sanders will become overwhelming. Not just from fans and social media, from the football community, from the people who watch film and evaluate talent for a living. And when that pressure becomes overwhelming enough, the Browns will make the switch. Not because they planned it that way, not because it was always the organizational intention, but because they will have no other choice. Prediction 2. When Shedeur Sanders does get his opportunity, whether it comes in the preseason against the Bills or later in the regular season, he will perform. He has shown, in every environment he has been placed in, the ability to read defenses, to process information quickly, to deliver accurate passes under pressure. He is a legitimate NFL quarterback. And when he gets a legitimate opportunity, with legitimate receivers who can actually catch the football, that is going to become impossible for even the most Watson-protective front office to ignore. Prediction 3. Judy's time as a meaningful contributor to the Cleveland Browns offense is running out. The reports from training camp are consistent and they are damning. The drops are not a one-day story, they are a pattern. And at some point very soon, the coaching staff is going to have to make a decision about whether a receiver who is actively hurting the evaluation process for their most important young player deserves to be on the field when that young player is playing. Denzel Boston, KC Concepcion, Isaiah Bond. These are the names that keep coming up as the receivers who are actually making plays, actually catching the football, actually giving Shedeur Sanders something to work with. And the longer Jeudy keeps dropping passes, the more pressure there will be to move those younger, more reliable options up the depth chart. And here is the part that is going to make your blood absolutely boil one final time. Because the cost of this situation, the real concrete, irreversible cost, is not just a few dropped passes at training camp. The cost is developmental time. The cost is evaluation clarity. The cost is the first impression that Shedeur Sanders makes on the entire NFL as a professional quarterback. These early months, these first training camps, these first preseason games, these first regular season opportunities, they matter enormously for how a young quarterback is perceived, how he is evaluated, how much runway he gets from his organization before the patience runs out and the next man up conversation begins. And Shedeur Sanders is spending that precious, irreplaceable developmental time in an environment where his throws are being dropped, where his competition is being managed in favor of a veteran who has not played in 2 years, where the organizational culture is so dysfunctional that his own receiver is going on TikTok to weigh in on the quarterback competition. He is spending that time fighting not just for the starting job, but fighting against the organizational inertia, the contractual dead weight, and the receiver room incompetence that are all working against him simultaneously. I want you to picture this. Picture Shedeur Sanders 5 years from now, having developed into the quarterback that everyone with eyes can already see he has the potential to become. Picture him leading a franchise to a championship, commanding a locker room, making the throws that win games in January. And then picture the Cleveland Browns front office, sitting in a conference room somewhere, looking at the decisions they made in the summer of 2025, and asking themselves how they almost threw all of that away. How they almost burned through the most talented young quarterback they had drafted in a decade, because they were too organizationally cowardly to commit to him, too financially trapped by the Watson contract to think clearly, and too negligent in their roster management to demand accountability from a wide receiver who was dropping passes at practice. That is where this is heading. That is the trajectory. And the longer the Cleveland Browns front office keeps making these self-sabotaging, tone-deaf, organizationally incoherent decisions, the more likely it becomes that this entire regime implodes and takes the franchise down with it. The more likely it becomes that Shedeur Sanders, the one asset this organization has that gives it a genuine reason for optimism, gets damaged beyond repair by the dysfunction surrounding him. The more likely it becomes that Cleveland remains exactly what it has been for most of the last 2 decades. A franchise defined not by its successes, but by its spectacular, self-inflicted failures. The Browns front office needs to make a decision, a real one. Not a preseason scheduling decision, not a joint practice rep distribution decision. A real, honest, merit-based decision about who their starting quarterback is and what they are going to do to make sure that quarterback has every possible advantage, including at an absolute minimum, a receiver who can catch the football. Jeudy needs to be held accountable. Not coddled, not protected. Accountable. And if he cannot catch the ball, then he should not be on the field when Shedeur Sanders is playing. It is that simple. It is that clear. And the fact that the coaching staff has not already made that call is itself an indictment of the organizational standards that exist in Cleveland right now. Drop. After drop. After drop. That is what Shedeur Sanders is dealing with. And nobody in that building is doing anything about it. Leave a comment right now and tell me, should the Cleveland Browns front office bench Jeudy when Shedeur Sanders is playing? Or do you think the drops are going to fix themselves? Leave it in the comments. I want to know where you stand. And forced choice for you right now. Do you believe Shedeur Sanders wins the starting job before the regular season begins? Or does the tie go to Deshaun Watson and this franchise burns another year? Drop your answer below. If you are not subscribed to NFL Gossip yet, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this story is not over, not by a long shot, and we are going to be here every single step of the way, covering exactly what this league does not want you to see. Hit the bell notification so you do not miss a single video. And share this one, because the people need to know what is happening to Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland. This is NFL Gossip. We will see you in the next one.
Well, there's some people that would argue then that Shedeur would get way less of a chance if that's the outcome, because the joint practices, and the only joint practice they have is that Thursday against the Bills. If that's all Shedeur gets, or that's all that we're talking about, and Deshaun gets that instead of Shedeur, that's a real advantage to Deshaun.
I would probably say the tie goes to the veteran Deshaun Watson. I've said this, and I know that people have come after me for saying it, but organizationally, I feel like this thing's kind of been a dead heat all the way through, going all the way back to the spring,